Welcome back to another video of the React Sprint series in which we are learning the React Spring animation library. So till now we had a look at the basics of React Spring. We discussed that React Spring is basically the combination of these two things. What all two things? First, the animated element. Let's have a look at it quickly. A quick 2 minutes recap, very quick recap. So this is the animated element. So this animated element allows you to actually set the spring values or the style values. And the second thing is the spring values. Spring values is a combination of the styles and the API. In the first kind of the coding video we had, we saw the spring values, which are the styles. Basically, these are the styles from, to, and so on. And then we also, in the previous video, we saw the API which makes the animation controlled animation. So that's it. That's what we discussed in the previous video. So you know the animated element is this, and these are the spring values. And we also know what does an API do. We also know what a higher order component is. A higher order component, an HOC, is nothing but a function that takes in a component and returns a new component. That's it. That's it. So our animated element is actually an HOC. It's a higher order component. And the next thing that we are going to discuss right now is the use transition hook. So in my opinion, the use spring hook and the use transition hook are the most widely used hooks that React Spring provides us. Now, why we are especially looking at use transition after we looked at the use spring is because the app that we want to build is is kind of very difficult without the usage of use transition. Why? You know, because we are building the carousel, and carousel is kind of like a transition system where we transition from one image to another. See this thing, as soon as you click next, it transitions to the next slide. So similarly, we even need to transition from one image to another in our carousel. So the basic difference between the use spring hook and the use transition hook is that the transition is best suited for animating in and out, whereas use spring is just used for controlling how the animation stays in the you can say in your object or in your HTML element. It defines a from state and a to state. It will start from, let's say, opacity 0 and goes to opacity 1, something like that. That will make it kind of uh, appear the object from kind of an invisible state to a visible state and so on. I hope you get it. It's just from point A to point B. When I say point A to point B, I do not mean the physical location. It is in terms of the style. It can be opacity 0 to opacity 1, or it can be size equal to, let's say, 5, width equal to 5 pixel to 50 pixel. That's it, from one point to another. Well, we also saw that it can actually we can actually make it a controlled element to go in the reverse manner as well. That is from to and to from. That's it. But in those scenarios, it's actually better to use transition hook. Use transition hook allows us to set a from value to value, basically a enter value and a leave value, from enter and leave. That's it. Don't worry about all the theory stuff right now. We are going to jump onto the code very quickly. Don't worry at all. It's very simple. Now you know, yeah, use spring. You were thinking how difficult these animations are. Front end animation is so difficult. No, they are not difficult. You just saw the use spring is the simplest hook that you can use out there. It was so easy to understand, and use transition is even more easy. So now we are going to look at, before proceeding further, I just want you to completely understand the difference between use transition and use spring. Use spring is for from and to, that's it. But use transition is defined whenever you want to make sure that your text or your element or your images, whatever you're animating, enters and kind of exits and kind of all these things, animating in and out. Cool? So what's the syntax? It's very simple. We define two things in the use transition hook. The first argument is the array of elements or an array of data on which we want to provide that transition. The second element is that the spring values that we saw in the previous example. It's nothing but a from, enter, leave, and a config if possible, and also all those event handlers are also possible. So all these things. Um, Cool. So let's jump on to the code very quickly. But okay, let's see this one itself before leaving. What do you think is this doing? Before actually writing even a single line of code, I want you to just see at this element and tell me what will it do, because we are going to code this only. So it's nothing but it's going to control whenever, as soon as the element, as soon as the screen loads, or as soon as the element is mounted on the screen, mounting and unmounting. That's the key here. In the previous one, the key was going from one position to another. Here, the key is mounting and unmounting. Remember that. Cool. So it's very simple. As soon as the element is mounted, or this data 123 is mounted, actually, you control what all things are mounted by this kind of transitions function. So this returns a transitions function and the API and so on. Yep. So it is going to go from opacity 0 to opacity 1. That's it. Now that's pretty much it. Let's jump onto the code right away. So enough theory. Yes, let's go do some hands-on. So let me close the uSpring because we are already familiar with the uSpring right now. And I will comment it out and I'll form a new. So quickly do this thing with me. Quickly follow along. What I'm doing here is I'm just commenting it out here. And then I'm going to create a new file called useTransition because we are learning the useTransition hook. I'm going to import React from React. I'm going to quickly create a stateless functional component or a functional component. We no longer call it a stateless component because defining state is now possible in our, this functional components as well. In the previous React versions, in the old times of React, the functional components used to be stateless and the class-based components used to be the stateful components. But now with the implementation of hooks, that's no longer the case. Cool. Let me, just like the previous one, just like the uSpring, I'm just doing the same thing here. Very simple. Now, what I'm going to do is, as you saw, use transition is usually applied on an array of elements. So I'm just going to create an array called data equal to 1, 2, 3. That's pretty much it. And what I'm going to do here is, so in whole React Spring library, there are two things that you need to take care of. First is defining your Spring values. Second is defining your animated div, as I told you here. That's it. If you understand these two things, you have the whole library in your control. There's no one that can stop you. No one can stop you from doing anything in the world that you want. Okay, that was a little bit dramatic, but it's okay. Sometimes it's fine. So I'm going to import the use transition and the animated element. And now I'm going to define my transitions. I'm going to define my styles. So define transitions equal to use transition. So this is very important because here it's going to actually set these transitions on this data. If we put any other data, we cannot actually, because you're going to just see it in a while. But anyhow, what it's going to do is it's going to kind of take an array and give you the ability to kind of loop over this array and define your and set your animations here. Let's see how it looks like. Similarly, we are going to return a kind of a object here. Either you can do like this, or return or something like this, or you can do a shorthand and directly return an object. So if you directly open the curly braces, it will think that you are not actually defining uh, your object, but you're defining um, your function, right? So instead of all this hassle, instead of doing this, we can also directly just return our object that we need to return. That's it. So yeah, these are one and the other ways to define your everything is acceptable. All of them, like this use transition hook has accepts all these things. Either it can accept second argument as a function or directly it can accept as a um, object as well. So now we have an object which takes in a from value. So from is the initial value. So initially we are going to set the opacity as 0. And opacity equal to 0. So I got a call in between while recording this, and that's why I kind of took a 2 seconds gap. I'm not going to edit this as well. It's fine. It's okay because I promised you in the beginning in the first video, if you remember, that I'm not going to uh, edit anything anything from this video. So from, enter, and leave. Just like in use Spring, there used to be a from and to. Here we have a from, enter, and leave. And we also have a config. I like to define my config, usually 1 second. That is fine. And now comes the most important part. How do you set these transitions? Similar to what we did in useSpring, now useSpring was not operating on an array of data, but useTransition is actually operating on an array of data. So how do we set that? We just put transitions, just a second. So this transitions is actually a function, and this function will can actually it's not yeah, okay, so it's actually taking all it gives you a kind of a mechanism where you can actually loop over all the items and put the styles. So the first element is these styles, right? It can be opacity 0, transform max, background color, anything, size, width, height, anything that you want to set. All of these are nothing but the styles. Now, as soon as, so this initially will set this as a from style, and then it will set an enter and it will set a leave, right? So what it's doing here is nothing but it's similar to from and to. It will start from 0 and it will go to opacity 1 styles, and the second argument that we can provide here is the item. Okay, so this item is nothing but one by one it will loop over all of these three elements. Cool. And now we are done. We can just actually return, or if you want, you can do a shorthand. Instead of returning, you can directly return it from here. I'll directly return my JSX element animated. So this Copilot is trying to complete whatever I'm writing, which is really cool. But right now I wanted to explain you, so I don't want it to complete, which is fine. It's okay. Uh, so how do we provide the styles? It's simple. We provide the styles like this, and I want to provide an additional style which is font size of, let's say, 50 pixels. Cool. And then we close this element, and then we can actually provide the item here, and we are done. Let's have a look at the end result. Oh, we haven't added in our app.jsx file. So if you remember our app.jsx file, we still have to import that new component that we just now created, and that is a useSpring component. And okay, useSpring is already here, so we need to use transition. That's it. And my text editor kind of automatically imports. In your case, it might not be the case, so you'll have to manually type out this line: import use transition from fun/use transition. That's it. So just quickly, very quickly going over this code. First, we define our Spring values. Then we set our element and those styles. In Spring, use Spring, it was very straightforward because we were operating on a single element. But here we are operating on an array of data. So this transitions function allow us to loop over the items and add one animated div for each element respectively. That's it. So if you see here, it appears 1 2 3 appears in kind of a, like, first the opacity of all these three is 0, and then it goes to 1. So that's it for this video. Now I have a challenge for you. As I told you, now this challenge is going to be the simpler. It's going to be very simple, not as difficult as the previous one. Definitely, because in the previous one, I did not tell you a lot of things like the API. I did not tell you the current value and all those things, right? Current position. There were a lot of, it was an open-ended challenge. You could do whatever you want and you could be as creative. But this one is going to be very simple one. This one is not very, but actually it should be, you should find it simple. So what I want you to do is define, first of all, just like this data, I want you to define a list of colors like this. Const colors equal to orange, pink, and blue. And then what I wanted you to do is I want you to create something like this. As soon as the mouse hovers, it goes from an inverted position to a straight position, and as soon as I move my mouse outside, it jumps back to the inverted position and then disappears. Something like this. Cool? So try it out. And I have one more challenge after this. Um, this challenge. So once you do that, we'll go on to the next challenge. I want you to learn this React and understand this React Spring library so that you can be an expert in when it comes to animations and transitions. That's why I'm giving you so much challenges. Those challenges are completely optional. If you want, you can skip the upcoming two videos, I guess, and directly jump on to where we start creating the carousel. But I would say don't skip them. Try it out on your own as well. So this is your challenge. See you in the next video. I am super excited as I told you. I can't wait to meet you in the next video as well. See ya. Bye bye.